some news that I'm sure Myles is going to be absolutely ecstatic about, and that's Pau Torres' move to Aston Villa. Myles, what do you make of this, and how's this come about? I think Pau Torres has definitely been at a crossroads, I'd say. Probably the last couple of seasons, been linked with some big moves into Europe. He's been linked with the likes of Manchester United, Arsenal, and he's obviously made this move to Aston Villa. And I'd say it's a very ambitious move from Aston Villa. What do you make of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what Villa will try and be in this market. We've already seen the signing of Tielemans, and I think that caught a lot of people off guard. And we know that Emery wanted to bring in players that kind of fit his system. And we saw at the end of last season how much Emery really values passing the ball out from the back and creating from deep. And Pau Torres is an excellent example of that as a defender. You're right, someone of a really high calibre, a Spain international, someone that was attracting attention all across Europe, even this summer. Juventus, Bayern Munich, Tottenham, really heavily linked. And he's made the move to Villa Park. And I think that shows the intent of the owners. I think it shows the direction the club's going in, but also shows the connection and the pull that Unai Emery will have, because this is obviously someone he worked with very closely at Villarreal. I remember him saying of him at Villarreal that it's a really special defender, someone that could go on to be one of the best in Europe. And he's only 26 now, I believe. So it's not like we've seen the best of him. There's still more to come. So yeah, it's an absolutely thrilling signing from a Villa fan's point of view.
I think that's it's a really good mature age as well, I think, for a defender. I mean, if you look at defenders, I think they do tend to kind of have a longer span of a career than, for instance, attackers who, obviously lose their pace, lose their legs a little bit at a later age. So I think he's moving to a very good age. Do you think this will actually introduce a different sort of way of playing out from the way Villa are playing at the minute, or do you think they'll approach things a little bit differently?
It's hard to tell until we see the rest of our business this window, because it depends on who else we bring in. But I actually think he suits the system that we started to implement at the end of last season far more than people realise. And I actually wonder if it just improves what we'd already started to get right. Because at the moment, we're kind of expecting Tyrone Mings to be the ball-carrying defender or the passing defender from the back. And although he's got a decent passing range, it's not necessarily what we'd attribute his game to. His athleticism, his ability to read the game defensively. He's great in the air. That's what Mings needs to focus on sometimes. And Torres, actually, they're the aspects of his game that you see slightly less of. He's not someone that's up for lots of aerial duels. Not that he's weak or short, but it's not really part of his game. He's not necessarily the quickest defender that we've seen, but instead what he does is he controls games from the back. No defender in La Liga touched the ball more times or made more successful passes than Pau Torres last season. So he wants to be a part of that build-up. And obviously playing some of the season under Unai Emery, that was always going to be a part of the plan. So I think he fills that gap with Villa. And I actually think it sticks with the same back four, but with the exception of at right back last year, quite often we were playing Ashley Young after Matty Cash's injury. And I think what it does is it actually moves Ezri Konsa to the right back position. Konsa played right back in his first season at Villa quite often. He filled in there during the lockdown season. We know that it's a position he can play quite well. And the way that Unai Emery likes to set his defence up is when you're attacking, the left back, Alex Moreno, does the majority of the wide play. And he will keep getting down that side. And what that means is the other three defenders, your right back and your two centre-backs, have to tuck in narrower and become a back three. And playing Ezri Konsa at right back is the perfect way of doing that, because it is someone who is a centre-back. You can also move Mings to the left-hand side of that, and being a left-footed player, it fits in perfectly. It probably does Diego Carlos a bit dirty, because I think a lot of Villa fans were expecting to see him introduced into the team next season after a really devastating first season with his injury. But I think with the current system Villa play, Torres is an upgrade on anything we've got.
Yeah, I think what it does do, it obviously gives you that strength in depth in that area as well. I mean, a lot of fans might be saying, okay, well, what about Diego Carlos? But it's not a problem to have an extra defender in there who's, a very good defender in himself. And like you say, it was very unfortunate that he did get that injury, and it all seemed to kind of go wrong for Villa at that point, although I'm not saying it was because of that, but a lot of reasons, obviously. But I think it's a great addition for you. Like you say, it really does kind of announce your intent, really, and how ambitious you do plan to be. I know it'd just be interesting to see where you go next in the transfer market. So I think to a lot of fans out there, who would you kind of compare him to? Like, I know you were talking about John Stones.
Yeah.
Who's
John Stones seems the obvious one because it's the one that everyone's kind of thinking about. And I'm not saying that he'll play the same sort of role as John Stones and move into the midfield. But if you think about the parts of Stones' games that you praise, it's not necessarily him running back and making last-ditch tackles. Instead, it's his ability on the ball and the way that he reads the game. And Torres is very similar. If you look at some of his key stats from last season, he's averaging about 64 passes a game from centre-back and 0.4 key passes a game, which is really impressive. John Stones in the Premier League is 0.3 key passes and 65 passes a game. So comparative, their stats are really similar. They seem like players that want to be involved. They want to move the ball forward into dangerous areas, not just kind of passing it around deep. If you look at that key passes stat, it shows that that is a way of starting attacks in the game. There'll be a moment that he tries to unpick things, and I think that's really impressive. So yeah, I think that's probably someone that I would look at more. I think if we think about someone like Victor Lindelof, when he first came to United, the profile that he was coming in with, it was a similar sort of vein of a really promising European centre-back who wanted to pass the ball, not necessarily be running around the whole time. And he kind of failed to fit into a system that allowed him to do that. And we've not seen him progress the way that we thought he would. Whereas Torres seems to be moving to Villa at exactly the right time because he's got a coach that knows him really well, rates him really highly, and will allow him to play that side of his game. So I think that's probably the comparison I would make. And actually, you talked a little bit about it being a real benefit to have that depth. We're in Europe now. We'll definitely want a better run at the FA Cup than we had last year, for sure. And we need some strength. And actually, last season, once Carlos got his injury, our centre-back options were, we had Jan Bednarek on loan, which was ridiculous for the first half of the season. Callum Chambers fills in there every now and again, or Dendoncker. Now, you look at the four centre-backs Villa have got: Diego Carlos, Pau Torres, Tyrone Mings, Ezri Konsa. Are there many teams in the Premier League with four centre-back options that strong? And that spine that Emery's creating, you could say that about the midfield as well. In centre midfield, with Tielemans coming in, we've now got Tielemans, McGinn, Ramsey, Douglas Luiz, and Boubacar Kamara. Are there many teams with five better centre midfielders? So Emery's really clearly building a strong spine of that squad. There's still additions to be made. We definitely need wide players. We definitely need another forward. But actually, we've not broke the bank with these two signings. I think Torres had a 55 million buyout clause, and it looks like Villa are paying 31 million for him because he's entering the last year of his contract, and he clearly wanted the move. So I actually think it's a bit of a bargain. A Spain international centre-back at 26, and you're paying 30 million for him when massive clubs all over Europe are chasing him as well. I think it's an absolute steal.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think what you mentioned there, I think when he was being linked to United, I think they were saying it was going to take 55, 60 million to get him there. Which, so if you take into consideration that, then yeah, it is probably considered a bargain. Like you mentioned, I don't think there's a better man than Emery to really kind of bring him in and kind of introduce him to the English game. And I just feel as though his transition into the team will probably be a lot smoother because of that. But Villa as well, with the signings that they've brought in, like you mentioned, the strength and depth that they do have, I feel like they will be well set for a push in the league and other cup competitions this season, more so. But you mentioned there about wingers. Is there anyone you'd like to see come in to the team, or you'd like to think you'd have a chance to? I know there's been mentions of Harvey Barnes from Leicester.
There's been a few names batted about, and actually some of them are of really high profiles, and that's another benefit of this Pau Torres sign-in. I think it could be the start of the floodgates opening, because a player of that profile joining a club shows the club's intent, and other players that might be considering them an option might look at it and go, actually, that is a project that seems quite exciting. Maybe I'll join in. There was talk early in the window and towards the back end of January of Ferran Torres coming over from Barcelona. That's not gone away. There was talk that we'd made contact with Federico Chiesa, and he kind of said no, he didn't want to move away and miss out on Champions League football, similar from João Felix. But with Torres coming in and being a bigger name, you wonder whether those players start to reconsider. Harvey Barnes is another one that obviously has been mentioned quite a lot. There's a lot of suitors for him, but I'd absolutely snap your hand off. But the exciting thing is, I don't know who we're bringing in, but I trust that it's going to be an excellent signing. Whereas last window, yes, we brought in Carlos and Kamara, but the business we did at the end of the window was pure panic. where it was like, we need anyone to fill the squad. We spent 10 million on Dendoncker. We brought Bednarek in, as I mentioned. We brought in Robin Olsen because we didn't really have any other options in goalkeeper. Whereas it doesn't seem like Emery and Monchi now, obviously joined the club 2 days ago, which is really, really exciting. They're going to have a really firm strategy of what they want to do to help Villa kick on, and not just do what everyone expects Emery to do and compete in the cup, but actually, you're right, in the league, they're pushing. They saw what Newcastle did last year, and all of a sudden, the top four feels more open. I'm not saying that I think Villa will get top four next season. It's hard to say until you've seen what everyone else is looking like by the end of the summer. But Emery has clearly identified that if they play the same brand of football that he played last season, well, they were the third best team in the league. So it's there. So yeah, wide players will be interesting. I'd love to see some of the names that are being mentioned, but maybe I'm being too optimistic. Hervin Lozano is another one that I've seen quite a lot, would bring a lot of pace. I'd like to see Leon Bailey kick on a little bit more next year. He's been brilliant for Jamaica over the last few games as well. So there's options. It's exciting.
I think what you mentioned there about the relationship that Emery and Monchi will have will be interesting to see how things kind of develop from there. But also, I was reading about what Tielemans said, and obviously his decision to join the club and actually his interactions with Emery before deciding to join. He just said, the way he spoke about the project, his intelligence on the game, and obviously his whole kind of, I suppose, the excitement that he gave him was a real factor in him deciding to join Villa. And I think that's something that it almost seems like there's a real, almost dynasty kind of building at Villa that now
that's what a world-class manager will do for you. Yeah, absolutely.
It feels like
and I think if you think that's not just because of the manager, our new owners have put a lot into the club to try and get us back to where we should be. We were in a dire position a few years ago, and there have been mistakes along the road, namely one who's just rocked up in Saudi Arabia. But the plans for the future are excellent. Even look at the stadium expansion. There are things that Villa fans aren't happy with right now, the new kit being one of them. But other than that, it seems like every decision the board make right now has been successful, and long may that continue.